Welcome to the infamous edition of the Headstones and Microphones, where we use AI to step into the past through a researched first-person simulation done through creative storytelling of history's most infamous people. Now, let's meet our guest. Welcome to the podcast. Let's start at the absolute beginning, where the public narrative hasn't yet distorted who you were. When and where were you born, and what was your given name?
I was born right in Brooklyn, New York on June 26th, 1915. My given name was Paul Castellano. My parents were immigrants who had come over from Sicily, looking to build a life in the working-class neighborhoods of New York.
What was your hometown and home life like as a child?
Growing up in Brooklyn, it was a modest working-class environment. My father was a butcher by trade, trying to make an honest living, but he also sold Italian lottery tickets on the side, right there in our neighborhood. The streets were tough, and you learned early on how the neighborhood functioned, how people made money, and how the local underground economy operated right alongside legitimate businesses.
Was there a story behind your name or a nickname that stuck with you?
People in the streets, law enforcement, and the media eventually started calling me Big Paul. It wasn't just a clever title. I stood at about 6 feet 2 inches tall and weighed around 270 pounds. Later on, when I built my 17-room mansion on Tot Hill in Staten Island, people started calling it the White House. And because I stayed isolated up there running things like a corporate executive, some in the media labeled me the Howard Hughes of the mob.
What were you like as a child, and how many years of schooling did you actually attend?
I was a practical kid, and I saw early on that the lessons I wanted to learn weren't being taught by school teachers. I ended up dropping out of school by the 8th grade. Instead of staying in the classroom, I went straight to work, helping my father in the butcher shop and selling lottery tickets, learning the meat business and the numbers game at the exact same time.
Was there a specific moment when you realized you were fundamentally different from everyone else?
It wasn't about a sudden realization, but more about the powerful family ties that shaped my trajectory. My sister Catherine married Carlo Gambino, who was a rapidly rising star in the underworld. Because of that bond of kinship, I wasn't just another guy on the corner. I was tied directly into the upper echelons of a growing empire. I realized my path was going to be entirely different from the average butcher on the block.
What's a decision that changed everything for you, but felt small at the time?
When I was a teenager, I decided to step away from just cutting meat and got involved in straight-up street crimes. In 1934, when I was 19 years old, I took part in an armed robbery up in Connecticut. It seemed like a quick way to score some cash at the time, but it set my criminal record in stone and showed the people around me that I was willing to take major risks.
Let's talk about your early run-ins with the law. Before the world knew your name for your most infamous actions, what was your very first arrest or interaction with law enforcement, and what were the consequences?
That armed robbery in Connecticut in 1934 was my very first official arrest. I was convicted for it and ended up serving 3 months in prison. The most important part of that experience wasn't the time inside, though. It was the fact that I refused to identify my accomplices to the police. That silence earned me a massive amount of respect and solidified my reputation for loyalty back home in New York.
At what moment did you realize your name would never be forgotten?
That moment came in late 1976. My brother-in-law, Carlo Gambino, was dying, and instead of passing the torch to his traditional street underboss, Aniello Della Croce, he chose me to succeed him as the boss of the Gambino family. Stepping into the role of the leader of the largest, most powerful crime family in the country put my name directly into the national spotlight. Suddenly, I wasn't just a businessman in Brooklyn anymore. I was the reputed boss of bosses.
Did fame make you more dangerous, or did it simply expose who you already were?
I never wanted to be famous, and I didn't care for the street corner gangster image. I viewed myself as a corporate CEO. I used my power to aggressively infiltrate legitimate businesses, control labor unions, and dominate meat distribution networks. We would influence supermarket chains to carry our brands and push competitor brands out. I didn't want the spotlight. I wanted the balance sheets, the union control, and the corporate monopolies. I also strictly forbade my family members from dealing in narcotics because the federal penalties were too harsh and brought too much heat.
Who do you believe betrayed you first? A person, society, or your own instincts?
My own home was where the real vulnerability lay. In 1983, the FBI managed to sneak in and plant an electronic listening device, a bug, right inside my Staten Island mansion. That wiretap caught everything: the inner workings of the Gambino family, business deals, and highly personal conversations. That technical oversight and the relentless surveillance of the government was the ultimate betrayal of my privacy and security.
What was your most unique habit or random fact about you that would surprise people?
People might think a mafia boss spends all his time in smoky social clubs, but I preferred my kitchen. Even after I became the boss of the entire family, I never lost my love for the meat business and cooking. I took great pride in my identity as a butcher, and I would personally cut, prepare, and cook high-quality steaks and meals for my family and close associates right inside my home.
What did the public never understand about the pressure you were under at the time?
The public didn't see the massive, bubbling division right beneath my feet. The Gambino family was deeply split into two factions: my corporate-minded white-collar side and the traditional blue-collar street crews who handled the hijacking, loan sharking, and gambling. Trying to keep those aggressive street crews in check while keeping the entire organization profitable and out of the eyes of the law was a constant, exhausting tightrope walk.
Did you have any known rivalries that defined your career?
My most defining internal rivalry was with the upstart capo of our street crew, John Gotti. Gotti represented the flashy, aggressive new guard that I completely disapproved of. He and his crew were heavily irritated by my corporate style, my isolation on Staten Island, and my strict rules against drug trafficking. That ideological clash between my corporate suites and his street-level crew defined the final years of my leadership.
What personal battles were you fighting privately while the world was watching?
While the newspapers were writing about the mob, I was dealing with severe health issues and the embarrassing exposure of my private life. The FBI's home wiretap didn't just record mob business, it also exposed my intimate relationship with my live-in maid, which caused massive strain within my marriage to my wife Nina and severely damaged my standing and respect among the old-school members of the crime family.
What was your darkest moment? And was there ever a time you wanted to walk away from it all?
The walls completely closed in during early 1985. On February 25th, the federal government launched the Mafia Commission trial. FBI agents arrested me, along with the heads of the other New York families. Being dragged out of my home and realizing the government had used my own living room conversations to build a massive racketeering case against the entire ruling body of the underworld was an incredibly dark reality to face.
What truth was hardest to escape when you were alone at night?
Sitting up on Tote Hill, the hardest truth to accept was that the old world traditions of honor, respect, and absolute discipline were fading away. I knew that the street crews were becoming increasingly restless and that the sheer volume of evidence the federal government had gathered via the wiretaps made a long-term prison sentence highly probable.
When the law finally closed in, how exactly were you brought to justice? Walk me through the final arrest, the charges that ultimately stuck, and the legal outcome of your trials.
I was arrested by the FBI as part of the massive federal racketeering indictments against the commission. The government brought heavy charges against me for extortion, labor racketeering, and conspiracy. However, I never actually stood trial or heard a final verdict for those specific charges.
What's the craziest rumor ever told about you? And what part of your story has been exaggerated the most?
The media loved to exaggerate the idea that I was completely detached and cold-blooded, operating like a cartoon villain in a massive fortress. They painted my isolation on Staten Island as some sort of sinister, paranoid retreat, when in reality, I was simply trying to run my legitimate and illegitimate corporate enterprises with the quiet discretion that good business requires.
What is the biggest misconception people have about your life?
The biggest misconception is that I was just a traditional street gangster who loved violence. I spent my entire career trying to move our operations away from street thuggery and into the boardroom. I wanted us to be seen as legitimate captains of industry who controlled labor, shipping, and commerce, rather than guys trading shots in alleys.
What would surprise people most about your ordinary human side?
People would be surprised by how much I genuinely enjoyed the quiet domestic routines of life. Despite the grand mansion, I was happiest when I was hosting family dinners, managing my legitimate food distribution businesses, and dealing with the everyday logistics of the meat trade. I preferred a quiet evening over a prime cut of beef to any flashy nightclub.
When, where, and how did you pass away?
My life came to a sudden end on the evening of December 16th, 1985, right in Midtown Manhattan. I was 70 years old. I had traveled off Staten Island to attend a dinner meeting at Sparks Steakhouse on East 46th Street. As my bodyguard and underboss, Thomas Bellotti, and I stepped out of our Lincoln Continental, a group of gunmen wearing light-colored trench coats and fur hats ambushed us on the sidewalk, shooting me 6 times in the head and body.
Was your downfall caused more by your own flaws or by the world changing around you?
It was a mix of both. The world was changing rapidly because the federal government developed incredibly powerful new tools, like the RICO Act, and advanced electronic surveillance that stripped away our secrecy. But my own flaw was underestimating the sheer defiance and hunger for power building within my own street crews, particularly with John Gotti, who orchestrated that ambush outside the steakhouse to take control of the family.
What past regrets did you carry with you to the end? If you could erase one decision from your life, would you? Or was it necessary to become who you were?
I didn't leave behind any written deathbed statements because it happened too fast on a New York sidewalk. But looking back at the trajectory, the decision to accept the mantle of boss from Carlo Gambino, knowing the deep, volatile divisions within the family, was the catalyst for everything that followed. Trying to force a corporate structure onto men who preferred the violent rules of the street was an impossible task.
What scared you more? Getting caught? Losing power? Or being forgotten?
Losing control of the family's discipline and watching the organization fracture into disorganized street violence was what worried me the most near the end. I wanted to protect the legacy and business empire we had spent decades building from being torn apart by reckless behavior.
When you look back now, do you see yourself as the villain, the hero, or something in between?
The public record and the courts will always label me a villain, a racketeer, and a mob boss. But from where I sat, I saw myself as a builder, an organizer, and a businessman who stabilized a massive industry and provided immense wealth and opportunity for my family and associates. I was a man who operated by the rules of the world I was born into.
Do you have any closing remarks about the interview or the stories you shared that you would like to share with the listeners before signing off?
Just remember that the flashiest guy in the room isn't the one who lasts. Real power is built quietly through organization, control of industry, and keeping your mouth shut when the pressure is on.
And that wraps up another conversation from Beyond the Grave. Thanks for joining us on the Headstones and Microphones podcast. Remember, do better with the life you have been given and choose to do good in this life. Please help spread the word by sharing and following the pod.